We're off to the moon today. Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. Today I'm joining my friend Indiana Jones for the June-o-ween challenge. Not only will you find tons of great Halloween inspiration, but you have a chance to win a $50 Amazon gift card. I'll have all the pertinent information for winning the gift card in the description box and pinned in the comments. That being said, let's get into it. I'm starting out with a 2-inch and a 2.4-inch foam ball. I've cut a flat spot on the top and bottom of the larger ball and a flat spot on one end of the smaller ball. And we're going to be using some Model Magic as well. I flattened down a handful of Model Magic so that it's nice and thin and easy to manage. I'm going to cover the smaller ball with the clay, pressing it firmly so that it's well stuck, and I'll cut away any extra and fill in any gaps. To smooth the clay, I'll roll the ball on the table. I don't mind if it's somewhat bumpy, because this is going to be our Moon Man's head. We're going to call him Mooney from now on, by the way, which would naturally have some texture. Now I'm going to roll a small ball, which I'll cut into 2. These will be his cheeks. So we'll press them into place. I press the cheeks on firmly, but I don't want to jack up the shape, so I am on the more gentle side, if that makes any sense at all. To incorporate the clay of the cheek to the clay on Mooney's head, I'm going to use a paintbrush handle to roll over the edges to make sure that there's good contact. And I'm going to repeat this with the second cheek. To create his nose, I used the flat end of a paintbrush handle right in between the cheeks to make a slight indentation. And now I'm using a slightly larger dowel to make some craters around his head. I'll cover the second ball with clay in the exact same way that I covered his head, rolling it on the table to smooth it out. I'm not going to worry too much if it's not perfectly smooth, but I do want this a little smoother than his head. You feel me? To make the legs of his trousers, I'm going to roll a thicker snake of clay, kind of like a log, which I'll cut in half, and I'll flatten both ends so that they kind of look like marshmallows. They're going to be about the size of marshmallows too. Marshmallows. I broke a toothpick in half, which I'm going to insert in the bottom of the larger clay covered ball. I'll use this to attach his marshmallow trouser legs. They're not quite centered, they're kind of off to the side because we're going to need the center to be free for his legs. Well, you'll see. I roll out a small thin snake of clay, which I'm going to press into the gap between his body and his trouser legs. I want them to look like they're one solid piece of clay, and this is going to help with that. Once again, I'll use my paintbrush handle to incorporate that snake clay with the legs and the clay on the ball. That's pretty much how I always incorporate the clay. I use a toothpick to attach his head to his body, and I'll fill in the gap between both the head and the body with a thin snake of clay, once again using my paintbrush handle to incorporate the clay. Like I said, that's just how I do it. There may be better ways to do it, so if you have a better way, please feel free to let me know. I'm always looking for new techniques. I am adding a little bit of water here too because the clay was starting to dry a little bit, so I want to keep it pliable. This wee dude is going to have a pair of sneakers, so to make those, I roll out a short, thick log of clay, cut that in half, and I'm going to add a slight bend in them to create his feet / sneakers. And you can see I'm just using my finger to do that. I want the front of his sneakers to have like a bulbous toe, so I rolled out another ball of clay, which I'll cut in half, and I'll attach each half to the front of his sneakers. I'll incorporate them the same way using my paintbrush handle. I roll another snake of clay, slightly thicker, which I cut in half to use as his arms. I'll push those into place, wrapping them around his belly and incorporating the clay once again with my brush handle. Now to make his hat, I flatten more clay and I punch out a circle for the brim. I rolled another snake of clay for the top of his hat, and I'm going to taper one end. This is going to be a top hat. I want it to be, a little wider on top. I use a dab of tacky glue to attach the top of the hat to the brim. To make the spindly part of his legs, I cut it down in half, and I'm going to push each half up into the trouser legs to create his skinny wee legs. So I'm going up into the styrofoam ball, about halfway I would say. And I'm also going to push them into the top of his sneakers. I'll remove them for now while the clay pieces dry overnight. Now that the clay is dry, I'll base coat his face and his hands with 2 coats of Ceramcoat white. And I'm going to kind of jump ahead of the base coating just because I have 3 projects and I don't want this video to be, too long. Okay? Oh yeah, almost forgot. I also painted the toes and the heels of his sneakers with 2 coats of white as well. I used Ceramcoat Rain Gray on his trousers, and again, always at least 2 coats. I give his hat, shirt, and his sneakers 2 coats of Ceramcoat charcoal. Yeah, so I didn't do this originally, but I decided he needed a balloon. So to create a moon-shaped balloon, I punched out a circle of clay and then a smaller circle from the center of it to create the crescent shape. His balloon will get 2 coats of pumpkin orange, and so will the dowels for his legs. I'll stripe the dowel with white, rain gray, and charcoal. I seriously have no idea what's going on outside, but for whatever reason, it's very noisy. I guess because I'm doing my voiceover, so, why not, right? I use my 000 detail brush in Rain Gray to paint in his features. I'm starting with his eyes, which are basically just, the capital letter D on its side. He gets wee eyebrows, give him some expression, and a simple, happy little smile. I use the end of a paintbrush to dot the irises of his eyes with Rain Gray. And I dot that crater I made for his nose with Rain Gray as well. I lightly dry brush his cheeks with pumpkin orange, just until I get the depth of color that I'm looking for. And we'll dot his pupils with charcoal gray. And I'm going to give him some character lines around his eyes with Rain Gray. White dot highlights for his eyes and his cheeks. And now I'm going to dot in his craters with Drizzle Grey. To embellish his t-shirt a wee bit, I'm going to add a white stripe at the wrist, and then I'm going to come back and go over that white stripe with a pumpkin stripe. I'm really only adding the white stripes so that the pumpkin stripe is truer to color. You know what I mean? I'm going to stripe his pants with charcoal. You know, I love my stripes and checks. I dot white buttons on the front of his pants, and I'll add pumpkin dots to the center of those white dots, you know, just for kicks. A couple of quick white dash lines to mimic shoestrings on the top of his sneakers, and we'll add white dots to the side of his sneakers, and I'll put a pumpkin dot inside those white dots too, because that's how I roll. Before I assemble this guy, I'm going to dry brush him completely with Drizzle Grey. Every part of him, his sneakers, his legs, his hat, his balloon, all of it will get a dry brush of Drizzle Grey. And then I'm going to seal him with DecoArt multi-purpose sealer. I'm using a cosmetic sponge to pounce on the sealer, and this dries pretty quickly, especially in this heat, so it didn't take long. I'll start the assembly by pushing his leg dowels into place, adding a dab of hot glue to keep them, you know, where they belong. Then I'll add some glue to his sneakers and attach them to the dowels. I cut some tiny vinyl moons and stars, which I'm going to add to his t-shirt in the front and the cuffs, as well as to the front of his hat. Using my 000 detail brush, I'll add a Drizzle Grey drop shadow to the left of the stars and the moons. I twisted a pipe cleaner around a scrap of ribbon to make a bow tie for him, which I'll glue into place, and I'll wrap the remainder of the pipe cleaner around his neck. He gets tiny wee orange and white baker string shoe ties. I want his hat to float a little above his head, so I added a small piece of wire to the hat, which I'll push into his head, leaving a gap between his head and his hat. I added his balloon to a piece of wire and decorated it with baker string and some vinyl stickers. I'll push that into his hand, again adding a small dot of hot glue to keep it in place. Finally, I'll glue him to a 4-inch wood disc that I painted with charcoal, and I added some stars and a moon. Mooney the Moon Man is done. I love the way he turned out. Let me know what you think. For my second DIY, I created a second Mooney head, which I'm going to attach to a wood block. I just thought he was really cute, and I wanted a companion piece for him. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint my block white. Well, one side of it anyway. I cut a small square from vinyl, which I'm going to use to mask off a section of the center of that white part of the block. And I'll paint over that with white again. Leaving the vinyl square in place, I'll now paint the rest of the block with charcoal. This will leave that section behind the vinyl white. I cut a 31 from black vinyl, and I'm going to place it right in the center of the white section of the block, and I'm going to add moon and stars to the other sides of my block. I added 4 white dots at the corners of the front of the block, and then I'm going to add pumpkin dots inside of those. And once again, I'm adding a Drizzle Grey drop shadow to my 31, and I'll also do the stars and the moons on the sides. I glue the head to the block using hot glue and a wee bit of 3-in-1 glue. I'll add a scrap of my crepe paper festooning around the neck, and this guy is done. If you haven't seen my festooning video, I will link it below for you, show you how to make it. It's really easy. So there he is. Cute, right? For my final DIY, I designed this wood piece and I cut it from some scrap plywood using my scroll saw. Once again, he'll have a wee floating hat, and I'll be using these wooden spools as wheels for his wee boat. I have one larger and one smaller, just because I thought that was cute and a wee bit more whimsical. So just like with the other two guys, I'll paint his face and hands white, 2 coats. The moon boat will be painted with 2 coats of pumpkin orange. His shirt and his hat, as well as the little wooden spools, will get 2 coats of charcoal gray. I paint the little star shapes on the ends of the boats with black. Once again, I'm using rain gray for his features, and even though he is flat surface, as opposed to the 3D surface of the foam pieces, his features will be exactly the same. I'll use the same colors and the same methods to create them. We'll dip that white highlights in his eyes. The cuffs of his shirt will get the white stripes, and then I'll cover those with pumpkin just like I did with the other. Here I'm giving his cheeks a wee bit of definition with Drizzle Grey, just kind of rounding them out a wee bit. I dot the craters on with Drizzle Grey, just like we did with the other moons. His cheeks get a touch of pumpkin and a white dot to highlight. Now I came back in and added white dots inside the drizzle craters for a little more, I don't know, something. I felt they needed something. You know what I mean? I'm adding vinyl quasar stars to those stars on the end of the boat because, of course, I am. Now for some final touches, I'm adding a 31 to the boat, and this will also get a few quasar stars. I pulled out my folk art floating medium, and we're going to add some shading. I prep my brush with the medium, making sure to get a nice healthy coat on there. I'm going to side load with Drizzle Grey to start. I stroke my brush on the plate to blend the medium with the paint. This will give me a gradient of color, darkest at the corner of the brush where the paint is loaded and fading as it moves toward the middle of the brush. I'm going to float around his face and hands first. So with the paint corner of my brush to the edge of his face, I'll lay down my shading. I reload my brush as necessary with either medium or paint or both, depending on what I need. And I'm basically outlining. That's pretty much what it is when you're floating in the color. Anywhere that I feel there would be a shadow. Okay, so right here you can see that along his hand, that shading is a little heavy. So what I'm going to do is use a clean brush, add a little bit of medium to it, and I'm just going to clean up that shading. And we're adding some to the stars. The floating medium will reactivate the paint and let you feather it out, so that's handy. So now we'll shade around his shirt, and we'll shade around his hat too. I'm just defining the brim here a wee bit, and I'll come along the side. This is more of like a highlight, since the gray is lighter than the charcoal. I load my brush this time with black, and I'm going to shade along the top and bottom of the boat. And you can see I'm doing this loosely. I just want a hint of the color there. Now, you know I like to add multiple colors to my shading, so I'm going to shade around Mooney again, this time with rain gray, and I'll do that to his hat also. I come back through with my detail brush and add the drop shadows to all of the stars and the moons and to the 31, just like I did before. I dip an old toothbrush in some water and then into my charcoal paint, and I'll sprinkle my piece by running my thumb over the bristles, and I'll do it again with Drizzle Grey. I drill a hole in the top of his head and in the bottom of his hat, which I'll add a short piece of craft wire to give him his floating hat. A wee dab of hot glue will do ya, and we'll pop his hat into place. I made him a ribbon bow tie, so I'm going to pop that on. And finally, I'll glue the wooden spools to the bottom of the boat for the wheels. The only thing left to do is to spray seal him with clear matte sealer, and he's done. Here's a final look at all three projects. You know, I have a thing for moons, so I felt like I really needed my moon fix. I can style these guys all together, or I can split them up around the room, but either way, I'm really happy with the way they turned out. I hope you liked them too. Please be sure to check out Annie's channel. I will have it linked in the description box, along with the playlist. You will find loads of inspiration from all the multi-talented creators that are partaking today. Don't forget about your chance to win the Amazon gift card. I mean, who couldn't use a $50 Amazon gift card? You'll find the rules in the description box and linked in the comments. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.